So once again, this is the second part of Lecture 9 and the last part, and this is on viruses. We went over viruses a little bit here and there, but you need to know more details. One, what about their size, you guys? How does it compare to cells, for example? Yes, they're really small. So are they smaller than cells? Absolutely. If you guys remember way back, well, it wasn't that long ago, January, the Cells of Life interactive thing online, right? You had, I think, Ebola virus on there, and you could really see that it was smaller than the bacteria cells, which are way smaller than our cells, the eukaryotic cells. Okay, so they were discovered a long time ago. You can see 1892 there. But what you really need to remember about them is you need to be able to describe them. I think on the essay it says define them. So same sort of thing, list their characteristics. So right away you should know that they're small. Are they alive? They're considered not alive because they're not made of cells, exactly, the cell theory. So they do have a couple properties of life, so you should know that. We'll get to that in this, or right here. They replicate, and what else? Since they can reproduce, what else do? They evolve. And things evolve when there are changes in their DNA, their genetic material. Also note that the viruses can have DNA or RNA, not both of them. And you need to remember that. Okay, now, there is a very famous type of virus called a bacteriophage. And that means that, why do you think that word actually? Why is bacteria involved in that, do you think? Bacteriophage, what do they do? What do these viruses do? They infect what? What type of cells? Bacteria cells, okay? So again, they infect all different types of cells. The common cold is caused by viruses. And then notice this last one back here. If it does have RNA instead of DNA, it's called a retrovirus. Kind of easy to memorize this. Retro means like it's backwards, back the way they used to do it. So it's retro. Maybe you've heard of retro clothes, retro furniture. These are the viruses that have RNA, and the flu is an example of one of those. Now, they look like little robots to me. The bacteriophage there is that blue one, and this other one is HIV. So what disease does HIV cause? AIDS, yes, okay? And this one, AIDS is a retrovirus, so it only has RNA, you can see. This one has DNA. And this one's perfectly made for landing on cells and injecting its DNA into the bacteria. Now, how do the viruses cause infections? This is also something you need to know for your essay and just in general for your vocabs, because you have a lytic cycle and you have a lysogenic cycle. And they're very different. So right now, let's just try and memorize them right now. The first one's lytic, and so now the DNA or RNA has been injected inside a cell, and right away they get the cell to go to work for it. They're kind of like parasites, because they don't have all the parts of a cell, so they can use a cell to make the parts of it, okay? So, for example, it's going to use the host enzymes to replicate. And how it does that is just like we do it with making our proteins. So it's going to get the cell to transcribe its RNA or its DNA and then translate it and build the little parts of the virus. Then they assemble inside the cell, and they keep making all these different viruses, and then they burst out of the cell. Now they're free to go infect other cells and do this again. So they're basically reproducing with the help of your cells. If you feel like crap and you have a viral infection, this is what's happening. The viruses are attacking you right now. They're bursting out of your cells, and they're causing problems for you, and you don't feel good, and your immune system is fighting them. And so that's why we don't feel good. Now, lysogenic. Do you see the genic, the G-E-N? I hope it makes you think of genetics or genes or both, because these ones are sneaky. And I also want you to know bacteria do the same sort of stuff when it comes to this. Bacteria can be sneaky also. So what the viruses do now is they infect a cell with some DNA, and they move on. And then they go squirt some DNA in another cell, and another one, and another one. And then the cell, say it's our cell or the bacteria cells, now have viral DNA inside them. And it gets incorporated into their chromosomes, into the host cell's chromosomes. And then what happens, it's kind of like a military type of game. If you've ever played Risk or some of these other games where you're just waiting, you're getting it all ready and just hoping it falls into place like you want it to fall into place. And then the host organism or the bacteria host gets weakened and they're unable to fight the virus. There's a signal to the virus that says, okay, now, attack now. And that's why we do get sick when we have a weaker immune system, because there are lots of these organisms, and in this case non-living things like viruses, that are waiting for a perfect time to reproduce themselves, which is at your expense. So again, how are we going to remember which one is which? Lysogenic, you see the what prefix in there? Gene. So are they hurting the cells right now? No. They're just giving their genes away and waiting. Okay, so let's watch this.
Beginning with infection of viral DNA from a bacteriophage, there are two paths of viral replication. In lytic infections, the host cell's enzymes replicate the viral DNA. Viral genes are transcribed and translated on the host's ribosomes to make proteins for the outer capsule. New viral particles assemble. When there are many new viruses, the cell lyses or breaks open and releases them to infect other cells. In contrast, in lysogenic infections, the viral DNA, or a DNA copy of the viral RNA, inserts into the cellular DNA. It is copied when the cell replicates. There is little or no production of new viruses. Instead, the genetic information for the virus is passed along to new cells. Sometimes an external stress, such as starvation of the host cell, activates a lytic cycle of replication.
Okay. So these,
Lysogenic viruses pass different.
So they can, yes. So our chromosomes, our DNA, our genome, that's what we want to call it really, our genome, all our base pairs and stuff. Remember how they said there seems to be a lot of stuff that don't code for human genes? And I actually went online and posted something, I don't remember if I got it on Edmodo, if I got it on Facebook for you guys, but it was like, it's down to like 20,000 something different genes. And so there is a lot of other DNA in our genes from bacteria and viruses, even some other different things like other parasites like different worms and things like that, just because their DNA is in close proximity of our DNA when they're living inside our cells. So there can be this trans thing where DNA is spread to other pieces of DNA. So yes, so that could be why we have some, all these other areas that don't seem to do anything for us. But there's other reasons too. There's regulatory genes, there's the genes, or they're not genes. So there's these regulatory regions, and then there's these other regions that we talked about, making the RNA. So yes, you're right. The other thing that's really exciting that can happen also is if the viruses or the bacteria end up staying in the cell, like the egg cells, then that is inherited and passed on also. Those endosymbionts, they're called. So this inheritance stuff is really crazy and very, very interesting. So it's not as simple as like your Mendelian genetics that you guys have learned. And we'll come back to that when we hit genetics pretty soon. Like hair color and being recessive and dominant, or eye color. You guys remember things like that from the past? So there is all these, there are all these complex other things that definitely affect it, inheritance. Okay, so last two slides, you guys. Please highlight this, underline it. You guys, if you've learned anything that has anything to do with your health in this class, is you better realize that antibiotics do not do anything for viruses. If anything, when you take antibiotics and you don't need them, they just wiped out a bunch of competitors. So now other bad guys that aren't bacteria can get started. This is how yeast infections happen also. Some of you might be aware, if you've taken antibiotics, you're more likely to get a yeast infection. Maybe you've taken care of babies, and they could get the yeast infection, the thrush in their mouth. And that happens if the babies have been on antibiotics, typically too. But also yeast infections for females as well. So, and that's just some minor inconvenience because we have, antifungal medicine also. But this is scary too with overuse of antibiotics because it's hurting your guys' immune system. It's, you are not going to be, some antibiotics are not going to be working on particular bacteria that you can get. And then it's already gotten really, really scary with this. So you can take Tamiflu, and there's a couple other antiviral drugs that have been invented. But they basically just help your immune system fight them. And I don't know the exact deal on that. If you guys want to look up and post that, I will give a little bonus. So how do the antiviral drugs work? For example, I know the antibiotics work by either killing the bacteria, and the original ones, like all the psyllins, like penicillin, amoxicillin, ampicillin, they actually fight the bacteria by stopping the bacteria from making a cell wall. They can't split in half if they can't make a new cell wall. So it stops them from reproducing, and then your immune system fights them. It just slows them down considerably. So I'm not sure what the deal is with the antiviral. Okay, now the other thing, the last thing you need to realize with viruses is we use them majorly to move DNA. This is with biotechnology, and it's pretty impressive. So we can get a virus, and we can get rid of the bad genes they might carry, put the genes we want them to carry, like maybe it's a gene for making insulin. And now we can give those viruses to a person possibly, and then they will go to certain cells, whatever gland helps with making insulin, inject that insulin-making gene into their cells. Now, we make insulin very successfully with bacteriophages, with just injecting an insulin gene into E. coli, and then the E. coli will make the insulin protein for us, and then the people can take the insulin protein shots that way also, right, for diabetics that need that much help with keeping their sugar in homeostasis and balance, their blood sugar. Are there questions about any of that? So the deal is viruses are just, DNA is just too small for us just to insert it. But the viruses can insert it at that micro level. So pretty awesome. Also, it can help with cloning experiments too. And when we say cloning, we're not just talking about cloning full organisms. You can just talk about cloning particular genes, like that insulin gene, if we want a lot of copies. Our genetically engineered fish, I know we have one for sure. I think there's two in there that were the toughest and made it through their transition into that tank. They have genes that have been cloned for glowing, and we'll talk more about that later. Any other questions? Okay.